Most people walk past garlic without giving it a second thought. They toss a few bulbs into a shopping cart, pay a couple of dollars, and move on with their day. It sits quietly on grocery store shelves across America beside onions, potatoes, and dozens of other ordinary vegetables. Nothing about it appears valuable. Nothing about it suggests opportunity. And yet, hidden behind one of the most common ingredients in the world is a story that has left countless small landowners asking a question they never expected to ask. What if one of the most overlooked crops in agriculture has been sitting in plain sight this entire time? What if the difference between struggling to make a small acreage profitable and generating meaningful income wasn't more land, bigger equipment, or larger investments, but a crop so ordinary that most people never stop to examine the numbers behind it? Because while millions of consumers see garlic as a cheap kitchen staple, a growing number of small farmers have been looking at it very differently. They see a crop that can potentially produce surprising returns from a relatively small footprint. They see customers willing to pay premiums for quality. They see opportunities that rarely appear in conversations dominated by corn, soybeans, wheat, and cattle. But if the opportunity is real, why does almost nobody talk about it? And if the numbers are as impressive as some growers claim, why aren't thousands of farmers rushing into garlic production every year? Those questions led us into a story far more complicated than we expected. Several years ago, a grower we'll call Robert found himself standing at a crossroads that many small farmers understand all too well. His property wasn't large enough to compete with major commodity producers. Every season seemed to bring new expenses, new challenges, and new reminders that scale often determines who wins and who struggles in modern agriculture. He watched larger operations spread across hundreds and sometimes thousands of acres while he searched for a way to make a much smaller piece of land produce meaningful results. Like many landowners, he initially followed the familiar path. He looked at traditional crops. He studied local markets. He ran calculations over and over again. But every time he reached the end of the math, the conclusion seemed disappointingly similar. The margins were thin. The risks were significant. And the amount of land required to create substantial income felt completely out of reach. The dream of turning a small acreage into a productive source of income seemed to move further away with every passing season. Then, during one conversation with another grower, he heard something that sounded almost impossible. A crop he had never taken seriously was producing numbers that seemed completely disconnected from its appearance. Garlic, a vegetable that sold for a few dollars at grocery stores. A crop that most people associated with kitchens rather than business opportunities. A crop that looked ordinary in every possible way. Yet the more Robert investigated, the more questions emerged. Some growers were claiming remarkable returns. Others warned that success stories often left out important details. Some believed garlic represented one of the most profitable small acreage opportunities available. Others insisted the reality was far less exciting once all the costs and labor were considered. Somewhere between those competing narratives was the truth, and Robert became determined to find it. At first, the numbers seemed difficult to believe. Stories circulated about growers producing thousands of pounds per acre, premium varieties selling for significantly higher prices than commodity produce, farmers markets where customers eagerly purchased locally grown garlic directly from producers, specialty food buyers searching for unique varieties with stronger flavors and better quality. It sounded promising, perhaps too promising, because agriculture has a way of turning exciting opportunities into difficult realities. Every crop looks profitable when only the best-case scenarios are discussed. Every success story sounds inspiring when the setbacks are ignored. And that is where this story becomes especially interesting. Because beneath the headlines, beneath the impressive revenue figures, and beneath the social media posts celebrating successful harvests, there are details that rarely receive the same attention. Details capable of transforming a profitable season into a disappointing one. Details that determine whether a grower succeeds or struggles. Details that many beginners don't discover until significant time and money have already been invested. As Robert continued his research, he discovered that garlic wasn't simply a crop. It was a business model, one built on decisions about varieties, marketing, labor, timing, storage, and customer relationships. Some growers were thriving because they understood those details. Others were learning expensive lessons because they didn't. And somewhere within that difference was the answer to a much larger question. Could garlic genuinely provide meaningful income from a single acre, or was it another agricultural myth that looked far better on paper than it did in reality? Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Those profit numbers sound incredible, but there's one cost that catches nearly every new garlic grower off guard. We'll uncover that in just a few minutes. If garlic has the potential to generate the kinds of returns some growers claim, then an obvious question emerges. Why isn't everyone talking about it? Why don't agricultural conferences dedicate entire sessions to it? Why don't national headlines celebrate it as the next great farming opportunity? And why do so many landowners spend years searching for profitable crops without ever seriously considering garlic? The answer begins with a simple reality. Garlic is not an exciting crop at first glance. It doesn't command attention the way cattle operations do. It doesn't cover vast landscapes the way corn and soybean fields do. It doesn't create the image of massive machinery rolling across thousands of acres. In fact, garlic is almost invisible within the larger agricultural conversation. It grows quietly. It occupies relatively small spaces. And it rarely produces the kind of dramatic stories that dominate industry discussions. Yet sometimes the opportunities receiving the least attention are the ones worth examining most closely. While major agricultural reports often focus on commodities produced across millions of acres, specialty crops frequently operate in an entirely different world. Their success is often measured differently. Their customers are different. Their economics are different. And because of that, many people never notice them. Robert certainly hadn't. For years, he looked at agriculture through the same lens as everyone around him. Bigger acreage meant bigger income. Larger operations meant greater opportunity. More land meant more profit. It was the traditional formula that had shaped farming conversations for generations. But the deeper he investigated garlic, the more he realized that some growers were following a completely different set of rules. The growers attracting Robert's attention weren't operating massive farms. Many weren't farming hundreds of acres at all. Some worked relatively small properties. Some focused on direct sales rather than wholesale markets. Some specialized in premium varieties instead of maximizing volume. And despite their smaller scale, many appeared to be generating returns that demanded attention. That realization challenged one of the most deeply rooted assumptions in agriculture: the belief that success always begins with expansion. Because while commodity farming often rewards scale, specialty crops frequently reward something else entirely: efficiency, quality, marketing, customer relationships, and perhaps most importantly, value per square foot. Think about it this way. If a farmer earns a modest amount from every acre, the path to greater income often requires acquiring more land. More acreage means more equipment. More equipment means higher costs. Higher costs create new risks. The cycle continues. But specialty crop growers often approach the equation from another direction. Instead of asking how to farm more acres, they ask how to generate more value from the acres they already have. That subtle difference changes everything. It shifts the conversation away from size and toward profitability, away from volume and toward margins, away from expansion and toward strategy. And for Robert, it raised an uncomfortable possibility. Had he spent years chasing the wrong solution simply because it was the solution everyone else was talking about? As he continued researching, Robert noticed something else. Many of the most successful garlic growers weren't actively promoting their success. They weren't appearing on television. They weren't posting dramatic claims online every day. In many cases, they were simply operating their businesses, serving customers, planting each season, harvesting each year, and quietly building profitable systems that outsiders rarely noticed. That lack of attention created a strange situation. On one hand, garlic had developed a reputation among certain growers as a potentially valuable specialty crop. On the other hand, many landowners had never seriously examined the numbers themselves. The result was a gap between perception and reality. Some people dismissed garlic entirely because it looked too ordinary. Others assumed every success story was exaggerated. But as Robert dug deeper, neither explanation fully satisfied him. The more information he gathered, the more he realized that garlic's story wasn't about a miracle crop. It was about understanding markets that most people overlook. It was about recognizing that consumers don't always buy based on the same priorities that drive commodity agriculture. And it was about discovering that not all garlic is treated equally once it reaches customers. Because while many buyers see garlic as a simple ingredient, there is one particular variety that consistently commands higher prices than the others. Growers know it. Specialty food buyers know it. Farmers market customers know it. And later, we'll show exactly why customers are willing to pay that premium. By this point, Robert had heard enough stories to become curious, but curiosity alone wasn't enough. Farming has always been a numbers business. Promises don't pay bills. Exciting stories don't cover expenses. And attractive headlines don't guarantee profitable harvests. Eventually, every opportunity faces the same test: the math. So Robert began collecting figures from growers, university extension publications, specialty crop reports, and market observations. What he discovered immediately explained why garlic had captured the attention of so many small acreage farmers. On paper, the production model looked surprisingly straightforward. A grower might begin with approximately 400 pounds of seed garlic. Those bulbs are separated into individual cloves. Depending on variety and size, that could produce roughly 16,000 plantable cloves. Those 16,000 cloves become 16,000 garlic plants spread across carefully prepared beds. Under favorable conditions, those plants may produce around 3,000 pounds of harvested garlic. Then comes the number that captures everyone's attention. If that garlic averages $6 per pound through direct sales channels, the result is $18,000 in gross revenue from a single acre. For someone accustomed to looking at traditional field crop returns, those numbers can feel almost disconnected from reality. And that is precisely why so many people stop and take notice when garlic enters the conversation. Suddenly, the question is no longer whether garlic can generate revenue. The question becomes whether those revenue figures can survive contact with reality. The deeper Robert looked, however, the more he realized that garlic is one of those crops where averages can be dangerously misleading. Every number comes with conditions attached. Every success story contains variables. And every profitable operation is influenced by factors that can dramatically change the outcome. Geography matters. A grower in one region may experience very different yields than a grower several states away. Climate matters. Soil quality matters. Rainfall matters. Variety selection matters. Even customer access matters. Two farmers can harvest similar amounts of garlic and still earn vastly different amounts of money depending on where and how they sell it. Some growers rely on wholesale markets where prices are lower, but sales volumes are larger. Others focus on farmers markets, specialty food stores, restaurants, and direct-to-consumer channels where prices can be significantly higher. Then there is yield itself. A strong harvest can dramatically improve revenue. A disappointing season can produce a completely different result. This is why experienced growers often speak carefully when discussing profits. They understand that garlic is not a machine that automatically converts seed into income. It is an agricultural enterprise influenced by countless decisions and conditions. Yet even after accounting for those realities, Robert couldn't ignore what the numbers were suggesting. Garlic occupied a category that looked very different from the traditional crops he had spent years studying. To understand why, Robert began comparing garlic to the kinds of operations most farmers already knew well. Traditional commodity crops have long been the backbone of North American agriculture. They feed livestock, supply food systems, and support enormous industries. But they also operate within a completely different economic framework. Profitability often depends on efficiency across large acreages. Margins can be relatively narrow. Market prices fluctuate. And success frequently requires scale. Garlic approaches the challenge from another direction entirely. Instead of focusing on maximizing acres, many garlic growers focus on maximizing value from each acre they already possess. That distinction may sound small, but it changes the entire business model. Robert realized that growers weren't necessarily investigating garlic because it always outperformed traditional crops. They were investigating it because it offered a different path. A path where smaller properties could potentially compete. A path where direct customer relationships could influence revenue. A path where quality and marketing could matter as much as acreage. That doesn't mean garlic always wins. It doesn't mean every grower succeeds. And it certainly doesn't mean $18,000 automatically appears at harvest. But it does explain why so many landowners continue exploring the possibility. The numbers create a question that is difficult to ignore. If a relatively small piece of land can generate that kind of gross revenue under the right conditions, what separates the profitable growers from everyone else? As Robert would soon discover, the answer had very little to do with revenue and everything to do with costs. Because at first glance these numbers look fantastic, but one major expense can cut profits far more than most people expect. For a brief moment, Robert found himself doing exactly what thousands of new growers do when they first encounter garlic. He focused on the revenue number, $18,000 per acre. It was the figure that appeared in conversations, articles, success stories, and online discussions. It was the number that captured attention. It was the number that made people stop scrolling and start calculating. But the more experienced growers Robert spoke with, the less interested they seemed in talking about revenue. Instead, they kept returning to the same subject, costs. Again and again, the conversation shifted away from what garlic could potentially earn and toward what it actually takes to produce it. At first, Robert didn't fully understand why. Then he started building a real-world budget. And almost immediately, the picture changed. Because while garlic can produce impressive revenue figures, it also demands investments that many beginners never anticipate. The first surprise arrives before a single clove touches the soil. Seed garlic. Unlike some crops where seed costs represent a relatively small portion of the overall budget, garlic seed can become one of the largest expenses in the entire operation. Quality planting stock matters. Healthy bulbs matter. Variety selection matters. And when growers begin pricing enough seed garlic to plant a meaningful area, many experience their first moment of hesitation. Suddenly, the crop that looked inexpensive from a grocery store shelf begins requiring a serious upfront commitment. Then come the other expenses: land preparation, soil amendments, fertility management, irrigation systems, mulch for weed suppression and moisture retention, equipment, tools, storage solutions. Every item appears manageable on its own. Together, they create a much different financial picture than the simple revenue calculations that attract attention in the first place. As Robert continued refining his numbers, he discovered that garlic profitability often depends on a distinction many new growers overlook. Revenue and profit are not the same thing, yet beginners frequently treat them as though they are. They hear $18,000 per acre and unconsciously imagine most of that money ending up in their pocket. Experienced growers know better. They understand that revenue is merely the starting point of the conversation. Profit begins only after every expense has been accounted for. Consider a simplified example. A grower generates $18,000 in gross revenue from an acre of garlic. At first glance, the outcome appears extraordinary. But then the deductions begin. Seed garlic expenses, soil preparation costs, irrigation expenses, mulch purchases, fertility programs, packaging materials, storage infrastructure, fuel, transportation, market fees, equipment maintenance. Suddenly, that $18,000 figure begins shrinking, not disappearing, shrinking. And the speed of that transformation often surprises people encountering specialty crops for the first time. This is why Robert noticed a pattern among successful growers. They rarely talked about revenue without immediately discussing expenses. They understood that impressive sales figures alone reveal very little. What matters is what remains after the bills have been paid. What matters is the margin. What matters is the efficiency of the system. Two growers can produce similar harvests and generate similar revenues while ending the season with dramatically different profits depending on how effectively they manage costs. Yet even after accounting for seed, irrigation, mulch, storage, and countless smaller expenses, Robert kept hearing experienced growers emphasize one challenge above all others: labor. Again and again, labor emerged as the factor capable of transforming a promising enterprise into a frustrating experience. Unlike many large-scale commodity operations that rely heavily on mechanization, garlic often demands significant hands-on work. Cloves must be separated. Beds must be prepared. Planting must be completed correctly. Weeds must be managed. Harvest timing must be monitored carefully. Bulbs must be cured properly. Storage conditions must be maintained. Orders must be packed and delivered. The workload accumulates season after season, task after task. And for growers who underestimate that commitment, reality can arrive quickly. Robert spoke with growers who admitted that their first season required far more time than expected. Some discovered they enjoyed the work. Others realized they had dramatically underestimated the effort required to transform garlic from a crop into a profitable business. That revelation explained why some people thrive with garlic while others walk away disappointed. The challenge isn't simply growing the crop. The challenge is managing every stage of the process efficiently enough to protect profitability. And as Robert continued investigating, he uncovered another problem that many growers never see coming until it is too late. Because even after months of preparation, months of labor, and months of anticipation, there is one harvesting mistake that can slash profits before the garlic ever reaches a customer. By now, Robert had learned something that many new growers discover only after making expensive mistakes. Growing garlic successfully is only part of the challenge. Protecting the value of that garlic can be just as important. A season's worth of planning, planting, irrigation, weed management, and labor can be affected by decisions made during a surprisingly short window of time. And among all the mistakes Robert encountered during his research, one appeared more frequently than almost any other: harvest timing. On the surface, it sounds simple. Plant the crop, wait for it to mature, harvest the bulbs, and sell them. But garlic doesn't always cooperate with simple assumptions. Harvest too early and the bulbs may not have reached their full size. The crop might still be marketable, but every smaller bulb represents lost potential. Lost weight, lost value, lost revenue. A grower may spend an entire season nurturing a crop only to remove it from the ground before it has fully developed. Yet waiting too long creates a different problem. As garlic remains in the field beyond the ideal harvest window, bulbs can begin splitting. Protective wrappers may deteriorate. Appearance can decline. Storage life can suffer. And for customers willing to pay premium prices, appearance matters more than many beginners realize. What looked like a minor timing decision suddenly becomes a direct threat to profitability. It was one of the first moments Robert truly understood how thin the line can be between a successful season and a disappointing one. During his investigation, Robert heard the story of a grower we'll call Daniel, a small-scale farmer who entered garlic production with enormous enthusiasm. Daniel had done many things right. He purchased quality seed stock. He prepared his soil carefully. He invested countless hours throughout the growing season. By all accounts, the crop looked promising. As harvest approached, he faced a decision that seemed insignificant at the time. Unsure whether the bulbs had fully matured, he delayed harvest slightly longer than recommended. A few extra days didn't seem important. Then those few days became more. By the time harvesting finally began, a noticeable portion of the crop had started showing signs of splitting. The garlic was still usable. It could still be sold, but much of it no longer met the standards required for premium pricing. The difference wasn't immediately obvious from a distance. Yet when buyers compared high-quality bulbs with damaged ones, the value gap became impossible to ignore. Daniel eventually sold much of the harvest, but at lower prices than he had expected. The season remained productive, but the profits looked very different from the projections he had imagined months earlier. For Robert, the lesson was impossible to miss. In garlic production, success isn't determined solely by what happens during the growing season. Success is often determined by a series of small decisions made when the crop approaches maturity. And those decisions can influence the final financial outcome far more than many newcomers expect. The more growers Robert interviewed, the more additional mistakes began appearing. Some harvested correctly but failed during curing. Freshly harvested garlic requires proper curing conditions to develop storage stability and maintain quality. Rushing that process can create problems that emerge weeks later. Others struggled with storage. Temperature and humidity matter. Conditions that seem acceptable can gradually reduce quality over time. Some growers sold their entire crop immediately after harvest without considering seasonal price fluctuations, only to discover that waiting strategically could have increased returns. Others selected varieties that were poorly suited to their climate or local market demand. Months of effort produced results, but not the results they had hoped for. Robert noticed that nearly every disappointing season could be traced back to one recurring theme. The growers weren't necessarily lazy, careless, or inexperienced. Most simply underestimated how many details influence profitability after the crop leaves the field. For viewers watching right now, consider this question. What farming mistake has cost you the most money over the years? Was it planting the wrong crop? Misjudging market demand? Waiting too long to harvest? Or perhaps something entirely different? Because one of the most valuable lessons agriculture teaches is that mistakes often become the most expensive teachers. And as Robert continued examining the growers who consistently achieved the strongest results year after year, he discovered something unexpected. The farmers earning the highest profits weren't necessarily harvesting more garlic than everyone else. In many cases, they were doing something completely different after harvest. And that difference was changing everything. Up to this point, Robert had spent months focused on production. He studied planting methods, harvest timing, storage practices, and expense management. Like many new growers, he assumed that the path to higher profits was simple. Produce more garlic, increase yields, harvest larger bulbs, grow bigger crops. But the deeper he investigated the businesses of successful garlic growers, the more he realized that many of them were thinking very differently. Their biggest advantage wasn't always higher production. It wasn't necessarily more land. It wasn't even larger harvests. Instead, some of the most profitable growers had become experts at increasing the value of every pound they sold. That realization changed the entire conversation. Because once a grower understands that profitability is not determined solely by production volume, a new question emerges. Why do some garlic growers receive significantly higher prices than others for what appears to be the same crop? The answer begins with understanding that not all garlic is viewed equally by customers. To many consumers, garlic is simply garlic. A bulb is a bulb. But among chefs, specialty food buyers, farmers market customers, and food enthusiasts, distinctions matter. Flavor matters. Appearance matters. Variety matters. Production methods matter. And those differences can dramatically influence what customers are willing to pay. This is where Robert encountered one of the most overlooked aspects of the garlic business, the premium market. As he continued researching, Robert repeatedly heard discussions surrounding two major categories of garlic: hardneck varieties and softneck varieties. Each offered different characteristics, advantages, and market opportunities. Softneck garlic is commonly found in grocery stores and is often valued for its storage life and productivity. Hardneck garlic, however, frequently attracts attention from specialty buyers seeking stronger flavor profiles, larger cloves, and unique culinary characteristics. Many gourmet food enthusiasts actively search for specific hardneck varieties because they believe the taste experience differs noticeably from mass-produced alternatives. Suddenly, garlic was no longer a simple commodity. It was becoming a specialty product, a product with distinct categories, unique customer preferences, and varying price points. Robert noticed that some growers spent considerable time educating customers about these differences. They explained flavor profiles. They discussed growing practices. They told stories about the varieties they cultivated. And in doing so, they transformed garlic from an ordinary ingredient into something customers perceived as special. That perception created value, and value created pricing power. The more Robert learned, the clearer it became that successful growers weren't simply selling garlic. They were selling quality, flavor, freshness, local production, and trust. Customers buying directly from growers often knew exactly where their food came from. They knew who produced it. They knew how it was grown. And many were willing to pay more because of it. To understand the financial impact, Robert began comparing growers with remarkably similar harvests. Imagine two farmers producing approximately 3,000 pounds of garlic from comparable acreage. At first glance, their operations appear nearly identical. Both planted carefully. Both managed their crops effectively. Both harvested quality bulbs. Yet when selling season arrives, their financial outcomes begin moving in very different directions. The first grower focuses primarily on average market channels and receives around $6 per pound. Multiply 3,000 pounds by $6, and the result is $18,000 in gross revenue. Those numbers are respectable and help explain why garlic attracts attention in the first place. But then Robert looked at growers operating within premium markets. Growers who focused on gourmet customers. Growers who emphasized superior varieties. Growers who developed local reputations. Growers who invested time building direct relationships with buyers. If those same 3,000 pounds sell for $10 per pound instead of 6, the equation changes dramatically. 3,000 pounds multiplied by $10 becomes $30,000 in gross revenue. The harvest is the same. The acreage is the same. The weight is the same. Yet the revenue difference reaches $12,000. That gap forces an important realization. Production matters, but marketing matters too. In many cases, marketing may be the factor that determines whether garlic remains an interesting crop or becomes a truly profitable business. This was one of the biggest surprises Robert encountered throughout his investigation. The growers achieving the strongest financial results often approached garlic differently from the way traditional commodity producers approach agriculture. They weren't simply focused on growing a crop and hoping the market rewarded them. They were building brands. They were developing customer loyalty. They were educating buyers about quality differences. They were creating reasons for customers to choose their garlic over countless alternatives. Some emphasized local production. Others highlighted organic methods. Some specialized in unique gourmet varieties that were difficult to find elsewhere. And many understood a principle that applies far beyond garlic. The marketplace rarely rewards products and commodities equally. When customers perceive meaningful differences, pricing often changes. As Robert watched successful growers apply these strategies, he began understanding why some operations consistently outperformed others despite harvesting similar amounts. The secret wasn't necessarily producing more garlic. The secret was creating more value around the garlic they already produced. And once he understood that, another question immediately followed. If marketing and positioning are so important, what exactly would a complete garlic business look like from planting season all the way to final sale? That answer would reveal the blueprint many successful growers quietly follow year after year. By now, Robert had uncovered something that completely changed the way he viewed garlic. The growers achieving the strongest results weren't relying on luck. They weren't stumbling into profitable seasons by accident. And they certainly weren't treating garlic as a simple crop that could be planted, harvested, and forgotten. Instead, they were following a repeatable process, a blueprint. While every operation was different, Robert noticed that successful growers tended to make the same critical decisions in roughly the same order. Interestingly, the process did not begin with planting. It did not begin with buying seed garlic. And it did not begin with preparing land. It began with something far more important: the market. One of the most common mistakes new growers make is deciding what to grow before deciding who will buy it. Experienced growers often reverse that thinking. They identify customers first. Are they targeting farmers markets, restaurants, specialty food stores, local consumers, organic buyers, gourmet food enthusiasts? The answer influences nearly every decision that follows. Once the market becomes clear, variety selection becomes easier. A grower targeting long-term storage and broad customer appeal may choose differently from someone pursuing premium gourmet markets. Robert quickly realized that successful growers rarely start by asking what they want to grow. They start by asking what customers want to buy. After identifying the target market, the next step involves selecting the appropriate variety and acquiring quality seed stock. This stage appears simple, but carries enormous importance. Garlic is unique because next year's harvest often begins with this year's planting stock. Poor quality seed can create problems that persist throughout the entire season. Experienced growers consistently emphasize that healthy, disease-free seed stock represents an investment rather than an expense. Robert discovered that many disappointing harvests could be traced back to shortcuts taken during this phase. Once quality seed is secured, attention shifts to the soil. Garlic performs best when planted in well-prepared ground with good fertility, proper drainage, and conditions that encourage strong root development. Successful growers spend considerable time preparing for a season long before planting begins. Then comes planting itself. Correct spacing, planting depth, and timing all influence the final harvest. Small decisions made during planting can affect bulb size, plant health, and overall yield months later. After planting comes one of the less glamorous but absolutely essential parts of the process: weed management. Garlic does not always compete aggressively with weeds, meaning neglected fields can quickly lose productivity. Robert noticed that growers who consistently achieved strong results treated weed control as a priority rather than an afterthought. The effort may not seem exciting, But profitable operations are often built upon tasks that receive little attention from outsiders. As the season progresses, the focus shifts toward protecting the crop and preparing for harvest. This is where patience becomes essential. Successful growers monitor crop development carefully, watching for signs that indicate the ideal harvest window is approaching. As Robert learned earlier in his investigation, harvesting too soon can limit bulb size, while harvesting too late can reduce quality and storage potential. Once harvested, the work is far from over. Proper curing becomes critical. Garlic must be handled correctly to preserve quality and maximize shelf life. Then comes storage, another stage where small mistakes can create significant losses. Temperature, airflow, and environmental conditions all play important roles in maintaining product quality. Yet the final step may be the one that separates average operations from exceptional ones. Strategic selling. The growers earning premium prices are rarely rushing to unload their crop without a plan. Instead, they understand their customers, time their sales carefully, communicate value effectively, and position their product to stand apart from ordinary alternatives. By the time Robert reached this stage of his research, he realized something important. Garlic profitability is not determined by a single decision. It is the result of dozens of decisions executed correctly throughout the season. Every stage builds upon the one before it. Every mistake creates consequences. Every improvement compounds. And that brings us to a question many viewers have likely been asking since the beginning of this story. If all of these pieces come together successfully, if the market is chosen carefully, if the crop is managed correctly, and if the garlic is sold strategically, could someone with a small property actually turn garlic into meaningful income? More specifically, before we finish, let's answer the question many viewers are probably wondering. Could a retiree with just 1 acre realistically make meaningful income growing garlic? As Robert moved closer to answering the question that had started this entire journey, he realized something important. The garlic story was no longer just about what growers were earning today. It was increasingly about what could happen over the next 5 years. Because every profitable farming opportunity exists within a larger market, and markets are constantly evolving. Consumer preferences change. Buying habits change. Food trends change. And sometimes those changes create opportunities that were barely visible a decade earlier. Throughout North America, more consumers are becoming interested in where their food comes from. They want to know who grew it. They want to understand how it was produced. They appreciate freshness, local sourcing, and transparency. For large commodity markets, those preferences may not always matter. But for specialty crops like garlic, they can be incredibly important. Robert noticed that many successful growers weren't simply selling a product anymore. They were selling a story. Customers weren't only purchasing garlic. They were supporting local agriculture. They were building relationships with growers. They were choosing freshness over distance. And in many cases, they were willing to pay more for that experience. This shift may seem subtle, but it has created opportunities that many small acreage growers are beginning to explore. Opportunities that simply didn't exist at the same scale years ago. One of the clearest examples can be seen in the continued growth of farmers' markets and farm-to-table food culture. Across countless communities, consumers are actively seeking food produced closer to home. Restaurants increasingly highlight local ingredients on menus. Chefs often look for products that help differentiate their offerings from competitors. Specialty garlic varieties with unique flavor profiles fit naturally into that environment. Robert found that many growers who once depended entirely on wholesale markets were now supplementing or even replacing those channels with direct customer relationships. The reason was simple. Direct sales often provide more control over pricing, more control over branding, more control over customer experience, and ultimately, more control over profitability. Then there is the growing demand for specialty foods. Consumers today have access to more information than ever before. They learn about heirloom varieties. They become interested in gourmet ingredients. They seek out products with distinct characteristics. For growers willing to educate customers and build trust, that trend can create meaningful opportunities. Organic production represents another potential advantage. While certification requires effort and planning, many buyers actively seek organically produced foods and may be willing to pay premiums for them. Robert realized that these trends were converging in a way that could potentially benefit specialty crop growers willing to adapt. Not because garlic itself was changing, but because consumer behavior was. Perhaps the most surprising conclusion Robert reached was that the future opportunity may not come from growing more garlic at all. Many people automatically assume that increasing profits means increasing production. More acres, more harvest, more volume. But some of the growers Robert studied were following a different path entirely. Instead of focusing on expansion, they were focusing on connection, building direct relationships with customers, creating repeat buyers, developing recognizable brands, educating consumers about quality differences, strengthening local market presence. In many cases, the additional value wasn't being created in the field. It was being created after harvest through marketing, customer loyalty, and strategic selling. The garlic itself remained important, but the business surrounding the garlic became equally important. That realization may ultimately be one of the most valuable lessons in this entire story. Because the growers earning the strongest returns often aren't just farmers. They're marketers, relationship builders, problem solvers, business owners. And as Robert looked toward the years ahead, he couldn't help but wonder whether those skills might become even more valuable than production itself. Before we reach our final verdict, consider this question and let us know your answer in the comments. How much would garlic need to earn per acre before you'd seriously consider growing it? Because the answer may reveal whether you're looking at garlic as a crop or as a business opportunity. After following Robert's journey from uncertainty to understanding, from curiosity to calculation, and from assumptions to evidence, we finally arrive at the question that has been hanging over this entire story. Is garlic actually worth it? Can a crop that most people barely notice in the grocery store genuinely become a meaningful opportunity for small acreage landowners? The answer, like most things in agriculture, is more nuanced than the headlines suggest. So let's start with the first and most important question. Can garlic make money? The answer is yes, under the right conditions. Not always, not automatically, and certainly not for everyone. But as Robert discovered, there are growers across North America proving that garlic can become a profitable enterprise when production, marketing, and management come together successfully. The key phrase is under the right conditions. Garlic is not a guaranteed outcome. It is not a shortcut. It is not an agricultural secret that instantly transforms every acre into a source of wealth. Success depends on execution. It depends on understanding costs. It depends on understanding customers. And it depends on treating garlic as a business rather than simply a crop. For those willing to do that, the opportunity appears very real. For those unwilling to do that, the results can be disappointing. Which leads naturally to the second question. How much money can garlic potentially generate? The answer varies dramatically. Yields differ. Markets differ. Costs differ. Selling methods differ. But throughout this investigation, one reality remained consistent. Under favorable conditions, garlic has the potential to generate thousands of dollars per acre. Not because the crop itself is magical, but because the combination of production and market value can create opportunities that attract the attention of small-scale growers. Revenue figures may look impressive, but as Robert learned, profit only emerges after expenses have been carefully managed. The third question is perhaps the most practical. Who should seriously consider growing garlic? Based on everything Robert uncovered, garlic appears particularly attractive for people working with limited acreage. Small acreage owners who want to maximize the productivity of their land. Homesteaders looking to generate additional income from a manageable footprint. Retirement farmers searching for a meaningful agricultural enterprise without needing hundreds of acres. Direct market growers who enjoy interacting with customers and building relationships within their communities. These groups often possess the exact characteristics that successful garlic operations require. They understand the importance of quality. They appreciate the value of customer relationships. And they recognize that profitability sometimes comes from strategy rather than scale. But just as important is understanding who should probably avoid garlic. People searching for passive income are unlikely to enjoy what garlic demands. Farmers unwilling to market directly may find it difficult to capture premium prices. Anyone expecting immediate success or instant profits may become frustrated by the realities of production, labor, and market development. Garlic rewards patience, consistency, and attention to detail. It does not reward unrealistic expectations. That brings us to the fifth question. What is the biggest risk? After everything Robert learned, The answer became surprisingly clear: underestimating labor and startup costs. Time and again, successful growers emphasize the same warning. New growers often focus on potential revenue while overlooking the effort required to achieve it. Garlic can be profitable, but it can also be demanding. Those realities must be understood before the first clove ever enters the soil. And finally, what is the biggest opportunity? Robert's research ultimately pointed toward a conclusion that challenged many traditional assumptions about farming. The biggest opportunity may not be producing more garlic. It may be selling premium garlic directly to customers. Throughout this story, we saw how two growers could harvest similar amounts while achieving dramatically different financial outcomes. The difference often came down to positioning, branding, customer relationships, and market strategy. The growers earning premium prices understood something important. Customers aren't always paying for garlic alone. They're paying for freshness. They're paying for quality. They're paying for local production. They're paying for trust. And in some cases, they're paying for a story. Which brings us back to Robert, the grower whose search for a profitable small acreage crop started this entire investigation. What garlic ultimately taught him wasn't that he had discovered a miracle crop. It didn't eliminate risk. It didn't guarantee success. And it certainly didn't make him rich overnight. What it did provide was something far more valuable: perspective. For years, he had assumed that greater profitability required more land, more acreage, bigger equipment, larger operations. Garlic challenged that assumption. It showed him that sometimes the most important question isn't how much land you have. It's how effectively you use the land you already own. Sometimes profitability isn't about expansion. Sometimes it's about selection, choosing the right crop, choosing the right market, choosing the right strategy. And that lesson may be far more important than any revenue figure we discussed today. So now we'd like to hear from you. If you had 1 acre available today, would garlic be your crop of choice, or would you choose another specialty crop? Let us know below. And if you'd like to discover more high-profit farming opportunities, subscribe to Acre Money TV 1. In our next video, we're uncovering another specialty crop that many growers believe can generate even higher returns per acre.